Meg Griffin has been through a lot over the years. She's been treated as the punching bag of her family and the lowest rung in her social circle. Out of everything she's had to endure, we're breaking down the top 5 worst things to ever happen to her. Coming in at number 5, when Lois stole Meg's boyfriend. Meg has always struggled with self-esteem issues, which has led to a pretty unfortunate dating history. She's so desperate for any kind of attention that she's willing to date almost anyone, which is why her family just assumes that anyone she brings home must have something wrong with them. But when Meg finally introduced someone who seemed totally normal, her family made a huge deal out of it. And Lois? She took it way too far. Between getting showered with compliments from Meg's boyfriend and hearing Peter's constant insults, Lois actually decided to make a move. Instead of respecting Meg's relationship, she pursued the guy herself. And then, in the ultimate gut punch, Meg walked in just as Lois was making out with him. Not only did she have to process being cheated on, but she also had to face the harsh reality that her own mother was willing to sabotage her relationships just to boost her own ego. Coming in at number 4, when Meg was abused while driving Peter and his friends around. After Peter lost his license, Meg generously offered to drive him around until he got it back. And how did Peter repay her? By treating her like absolute garbage. The entire time, Peter whined about being bored, threw childish tantrums, and forced her to chauffeur him and his friends wherever they wanted. But then, things took a dangerous turn. During one of these miserable car rides, Meg was pushed past her breaking point. Her hat was lit on fire, only for it to be doused with beer, all while Peter and his friends laughed at her expense. That was it. She snapped. In a fit of pure rage, Meg took her frustrations out on another motorist, assaulting him right there in the middle of the street. Coming in at number 3, Meg was replaced on a family reality show. After being completely humiliated at a sleepover, Meg decided to get back at her family by airing their dirty laundry on the local show Diane. But her plan totally backfired. Instead of embarrassing them, the family ended up landing a reality show deal. A producer saw their chaotic dynamic and thought they'd make great TV. For Meg, though, this was a nightmare. She was already mortified that her friends had seen how embarrassing her family was. But now, cameras were capturing everything. It didn't take long before she snapped. During a family meal, Meg stormed off, demanding that the cameras be turned off and the show be canceled. But instead of listening to her, the producers came up with a perfect solution. They replaced Meg with a more cooperative young woman who would play along. To make things even worse, Peter and Lois met with Meg in secret, telling her she wasn't allowed to live at home while the show was filming, just to keep her from ruining their newfound fame. Imagine being kicked out of your own home just so your family could have 15 minutes of reality TV glory. That's pretty traumatizing for a teenager already struggling to fit in. At number 2 is the time Meg was assumed dead, only to be kidnapped by Chris. When she realized it was skip day at school, Meg returned home to find no one there. Confused, she called Lois, only to be brushed off. Both Peter and Lois insisted Meg was already with them, assuming the call was just a prank. With nothing else to do, Meg decided to make the most of it by heading to the bowling alley, where customers had to drop off their IDs when getting their shoes. In a bizarre mix-up, her ID was mistakenly given to another girl, who later died in a car wreck. Tired of being neglected, Meg chose to embrace the mistake, move to a new town, and adopt a whole new identity. Meanwhile, Chris was soaking up the attention at school. With his classmates sympathizing over Meg's death, he became the center of concern and was absolutely loving the newfound popularity. So when Meg finally reached out, revealing she was alive and wanted to come home, Chris took things to another level. He kidnapped her. Meg fought her way to freedom and exposed Chris to the entire school. But in typical fashion, Chris managed to talk his way out of trouble, leaving Meg completely ignored once again. And at number 1, the absolute worst thing to ever happen to Meg, she was sold into slavery to pay off Peter's debt. Neil Goldman has always been obsessively creepy when it comes to his fixation on Meg. While he's toned it down in later seasons, the episode 8 Simple Rules for Buying My Teenage Daughter took things to a whole new level of disturbing. Peter, in typical fashion, completely misunderstood the concept of opening a tab at Mort's pharmacy and ended up buried in debt. His solution? Instead of finding a way to pay it off himself, he decided to use Meg as payment. As horrifying as that already sounds, what's worse is that everyone went along with it. Meg was forced into slavery, not just for Neil, but for his entire family. If that's not the most humiliating and disturbing thing Meg has ever endured, I don't know what is.